The Mansion in the Mist by John Bellairs, Chapter 12. The excited, soft voice told Anthony that he was in very great danger. If he went back to the world of the moonlit mansion, he would suffer horribly. He wouldn't just die. No, nothing quite so as merciful as that, but his spirit would be smothered inside a statue of stone forever and ever. He would beg to die, but the autarchs would not let it happen. Instead, he would suffer a long, drawn-out death, an agonizing living death that would last for hundreds and hundreds of years. It would be worse than the most horrible torture that anyone could possibly imagine. As Anthony listened to these ominous words, he felt very, very frightened. He wanted to run away, but he couldn't. His feet stayed rooted to the floor. His ears took in every horrid syllable. When the voice finally died away, Anthony slumped into a heap on the cold floorboards. And that was where he awoke in the morning, blinking at the bright sunlight that streamed through his bedroom window. Anthony shook his head groggily and struggled to his feet. He moved slowly toward his bed and sat down. What was it that he had heard? Was it the ghost of one of those poor vacationers who had been turned to stone statues in the garden next to the autarch's mansion? There were a lot of questions spinning around in Anthony's weary brain, but he told himself that he should keep quiet about the whole experience. He would never tell his brother Keith or his parents because they wouldn't believe him. Miss Eels and Emerson would take him seriously, but if they heard what the whisperer had said, they might make him stay home the next time they went on some wild adventure. The things that had happened to him up at the lonely Canadian cottage made him feel a little different about things. He was the one who had discovered the chest and the password that activated it. He had gone to that strange other world alone. He had spied on the autarchs and had learned something of their frightening plans. He had even gone back later with Emerson to find out more. Now that Anthony looked back on these experiences, they made him feel courageous and important. Most of the time, he was the sort of kid who didn't feel that he was worth much. That was why he was proud of the frightening experiences he had had. And if Emerson went back to the magic kingdom of the autarchs, Anthony wanted to be there at his side. Weeks passed. Miss Eels fed little tidbits of information to Anthony now and then. The table that appeared in the painting was not in the house anymore. It had turned out to be a valuable antique, so it had been sold, but the name of the buyer had been kept secret. There was no way of tracing the table. To Anthony, it was as if a door had been slammed in their faces. He was sure Emerson felt the same. He also knew from the way Miss Eels was acting that she was relieved. Whenever he saw her at the library, she was extremely cheerful. She even hummed little tunes as she went about her business. Miss Eels' behavior just made Anthony more and more grumpy and frustrated. Why did she have to be so happy just because their adventure was probably over? October slid by and Halloween approached. One evening when Anthony was shoving a heavy cart of books down an aisle of the library, Miss Eels surprised him by asking if he wanted to be a waiter at a party that Mrs. Oxenstern was giving. Mrs. Oxenstern was the head of the Hoosac Library. Board, and she was quite bossy. She and Miss Eels never liked each other very much. In fact, Mrs. Oxenstern would have fired Miss Eels many years ago if she had been able to, but Miss Eels had an ironclad contract that guaranteed her job for life. Lately, the two of them had tried to get along better, and as a gesture of goodwill, Mrs. Eels had volunteered to show up at Mrs. Oxenstern's annual Halloween party. Furthermore, she had offered to bring members of the library staff to help, and that was why she was taking Anthony, who was not exactly thrilled by the idea of working for Mrs. Oxenstern. "It's not as if you'd actually be working for Mrs. O," said Miss Eels with an encouraging smile. "You'd be working for all of us, the whole library staff, and you'd be helping build better relations between the staff and the library board. Then they'll give us more money and we'll be able to buy more books, and maybe put a new roof on this old wreck of a building. Doesn't that sound like a good idea to you?" Anthony grunted. He knew that he would give in and work the party, but not for any of the reasons that Miss Eels had given him. He would do it because of his loyalty to her. And so, on the evening of October 31st, Anthony found himself in a waiter's uniform, serving glasses of pink punch at Mrs. Oxenstern's party. Mrs. Oxenstern lived in a 23-room mansion in the nicest part of town, and her living room was enormous. At one end of it was a table with the punch bowl, and near it was another table loaded with goodies of all sorts. Canapes, plates of sliced ham and chicken and smoked tongue, deviled eggs, cheese and crackers, goose liver pate, and stacks of cucumber sandwiches. Anthony glanced toward the other end of the room. Miss Eales was wearing her best dress, and she was trying very hard to be sociable. She nodded and smiled at practically everything that was said to her, though it was clear to Anthony that she hated every minute of the evening and couldn't wait for it to be over. That goes for me too, thought Anthony as he filled another cup of punch. Later in the evening, another waiter took over Anthony's job for a while so he could go out to the veranda and get some air, but as he walked toward the French doors, Anthony stopped suddenly. He had seen something that made his face flush and his heart beat wildly. Immediately he dashed across the room to find Miss Eales. She was standing with her back to him, listening patiently to a long-winded story that was being told by another guest. Anthony reached out and touched Miss Eales on the shoulder, and she jumped. The coffee cup in her hand rocked dangerously back and forth in its saucer, but luckily it didn't fall. "Anthony!" exclaimed Miss Eales as she turned around. "What on earth?" Miss Eales' voice died away when she saw the look on Anthony's face. It was pretty clear he had something important to tell her that probably needed to be told in private. "Yes, Anthony," said Miss Eales in her most polite voice. "What can I do for you?" I have something to show you," said Anthony, who was trying hard to fight down the excitement that was welling up inside him. "Well, it'll have to wait a few minutes," said Miss Eales sweetly. "I'm listening to a fascinating story, and I don't want to miss any of it." Anthony grimaced. He hated when Miss Eales tried to play perfect hostess. She always overdid it, and he could hardly wait for her to behave like her normal everyday self. Okay, I'll talk to you later, said Anthony curtly, and he turned away. He went back to the punch table and thanked the other boy for giving him a break. A few minutes later, Miss Eales walked up to Anthony with an apologetic smile on her face. "I'm sorry I had to act like such a drip," she said as Anthony filled her cup. "They expect you to be so polite at these gatherings, and it's driving me bats. So what's so important?" Anthony swallowed hard. "It's here," he whispered excitedly. "The table, the one in the picture. Mrs. Oxenstern must have bought it. It's right over there by the sofa. Go ahead, see for yourself." Miss Eales was stunned. She had never expected a development like this. Silently, she set down her cup and saucer and walked to the other end of the room. A few seconds later, she was back and her face was pale. "You're absolutely right, Anthony," she whispered in an awestruck voice. "That's it, all right, no doubt about it. When Emerson hears the news, he'll really flip." Anthony glanced nervously at Mrs. Oxenstern, who was standing at the other end of the room. "Do you think she knows," he asked, "about the Autarks and their mansion, I mean?" Miss Eales laughed. "Ha! Are you kidding? Mrs. O thinks the table is a valuable antique. That's why she bought it. And to tell the truth, we don't really know much more than that. Emerson's idea about using the table and some playing cards to get back to the Misty Mansion, well, it may just be a lot of hogwash. At any rate, we're not going to try to smuggle the table out of here tonight. I'll give him a call later this evening and find out what he wants to do next." The party ended, and the guests went home. Mrs. Oxenstern locked the doors and turned out the lights. But just before she went to bed, she came downstairs in her bathrobe and slippers to have one more look at the antique writing desk that she had just bought. She was proud of the desk, but she had to admit that there was something odd about it. It fascinated her in a way that was unsettling, almost as if it were alive. Mrs. Oxenstern turned on the living room lights. There by the grand piano stood the little desk, which had been designed by the noted Victorian architect, Frank Furness. Mr. Furness usually designed buildings, but he also did a few bureaus and desks. They were quite rare. Slowly, Mrs. Oxenstern crossed the room. She walked around the desk, admiring the fine leather top with its border of little gilded flowers. She ran her hand over the polished ebony rail with its knobbly miniature columns and carved fan ornament at the back, and she slid out the drawer in the front. It was empty, but there were ink stains on the bottom, and it smelled of pencil shavings, a valuable and beautiful object, but nothing more. Giving the desk an affectionate little pat, Mrs. Oxenstern glanced at it once more and then hurried off to bed. The hours of the night slowly passed. At 2 a.m, the grandfather clock at the stair landing struck, and Mrs. Oxenstern suddenly sat bolt upright in her bed. It wasn't the clock that had awakened her, but a noise downstairs. Mrs. Oxenstern had lived in this house a long time, and she knew all its noises. Rattle, rattle, bang, rattle, rattle, bang. That was the sound of one of the French doors in the living room. It was loose and swinging back and forth in the wind. Maria, Mrs. Oxenstern's live-in maid, was to have locked up the house. Apparently, she hadn't done a very good job, and she would hear from her employer in the morning. With a discontented sigh, Mrs. Oxenstern threw back the covers and swung herself out of bed. In slippers and bathrobe once more, she marched angrily down the carpeted steps and strode into the living room. Then she stopped and stared. One glass-paned door was swinging back and forth, and a cold wind blew into the room. The desk was surrounded by a trembling halo of gray light, and behind it stood a tall, gaunt man in a black frock coat. Mrs. Oxenstern recognized him immediately. It was Mr. Ambrose, the man in the painting. She had seen it on the stair when she came to buy the desk. Now she stood frozen in terror. She saw that the man was fingering some playing cards that lay on the desk, and she heard the words, 3, 7, 9, and the ace of spades reversed is death. Then the face of the man changed, so that now she saw a horrible decaying corpse, with glazed, unseeing eyes and pallid lips pulled back in a rigid grin. The creature's eyes met hers, and she fell to the floor, unconscious. And that is the end of chapter 12.